So for those who don't know me, I'm Robert Vick, and I'm the Director of Business Development for PebblePad across the Asia Pacific region. And it's my privilege to introduce our next speaker. So Giulia McCorkell. So Giulia has worked as a radiation therapist in various roles since graduating from RMIT in 2005. Giulia's passion for education and training saw her complete a graduate diploma in education, and since then has worked in the UK and Australia in a range of lecturing and education roles, as well as research and project work for places such as Monash Children's Research Institute. Giulia now works clinically at the Peter MacCallum Cancer Centre and is the curriculum lead for the new undergraduate Bachelor of Medical Radiation at RMIT. And handing over to you, Giulia. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you for the opportunity to present. I'll just start with a very quick acknowledgement of country and pay my deepest respects to all the elders from across the ages, in particular the Woiwurrung and Boonwurrung language groups of the people of the Kulin Nation from Melbourne, Victoria, which is where I'm presenting from. And I'm going to talk today about the assessment strategy that we have designed across our medical radiation discipline. We'll start with what medical radiation is, and there's a misconception that as a radiation therapist I take x-rays, and in fact there is quite a few different divisions of medical radiation practice. So as an overarching discipline, we are an area of healthcare that uses radiation to diagnose and treat disease, but within that we have a range of different divisions of practice. So we've got up the diagnostic end, medical imaging, which you may be familiar with if you've ever had an x-ray for a broken arm, perhaps a CT scan. We've got myself and radiation therapy up at the therapeutic end of the spectrum, predominantly treating patients with cancer using radiation, although we do some non-malignant conditions, things like Achilles tendonitis, and I like to claim that we were the ones that gave Usain Bolt his superpowers because he did have low-dose radiation therapy for his Achilles tendonitis, but unfortunately the science doesn't quite back me up on that one. And then in the middle, doing a little bit of both diagnostic and therapeutic work, which we coined theranostics, is nuclear medicine, where a radioactive dye is introduced into the patient's body. It is targeted towards a particular molecule that a organ of interest that's being imaged will use, and it gets taken up by that organ of interest, drops off its little radioactive tag and sends out a signal which allows us to look at how that organ is functioning, or if we put a different radioactive material onto it, to actually treat that organ at the same time. So we're quite distinct in our divisions of practice, but we all fit under the same umbrella, and the students all complete the same program, which includes 51 weeks of work integrated learning across a 4-year degree, which is delivered in 3.5 calendar years. And during that work integrated learning program, medical radiation practitioners complete the assessment rather than the academics. So there is a challenge in ensuring consistency between the different medical radiation practitioners and understanding the differences between academic performance and clinical placement performance as well. So being a health field, we are answerable to AHPRA, and there's several different boards that sit under AHPRA. And we are, of course, in the Medical Radiation Practice Board of Australia. You've probably already heard all this morning my colleague from RMIT give you a bit of a demo of the equivalent for osteo. These are our capabilities in medical radiation practice. So we are, as it quite clearly shows here, even though we are very different divisions of practice, we are all working towards the same professional standards and the same graduate outcomes. And so the question for us in designing our clinical assessment framework was, is it actually possible to have a single framework that can assess all students while still maintaining the division-specific components of the oh, hang on, I am sharing my screen. Sorry, thank you for the prompt. There we go. Oops, no, wrong one. Sorry about that. This one. Sorry about that. Thank you for prompting me. I can't actually see which screen I'm sharing.
You were right just a second ago, Giulia. What you just showed.
Is that the right one now?
Yeah.
Yep, thank you.
Yep, that's perfect.
sorry, I'll just skip through for the context. So as I mentioned, they're the 3 different divisions, just to give you that visual layout: ARPRA and MRPBA capabilities, which is where we were up to. So as I said, we're trying to look at whether we can align the 3 divisions and develop an assessment that looks at all 3 divisions, but also allows their individual characteristics to shine through. So in the first instance, the concept of capabilities is worth exploring in a little bit more detail. So most people might be familiar with the word competence, which is the application of knowledge, skills, and attitude, and demonstrating what people can know or do. So essentially taking theory and applying it into practice. And capabilities build on these further. With competency, you can watch somebody do an activity and determine whether they can do it or not. And so it's quite straightforward to assess. But with capabilities, they expand a little bit further. So it's taking a routine process and putting it into a different context, whether that be different patients. So for example, children versus adults, non-verbal autistic patients, or people with culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. Perhaps using different technologies. All departments have different hardware that they might be using. It's kind of like the equivalent of a Microsoft versus an Apple platform for perhaps different clinical settings. So we're working in a emergency department where there's trauma patients, the whole frenzy of emergency care versus a slightly more relaxed outpatient scenario. Are we attached to a tertiary hospital, or are we working in a regional or remote part of the country? And different workplaces and protocols and processes. And so capability is a little bit takes that competence and looks at whether you can adapt that standard practice into that different environment. And it's a little bit more difficult to assess, because unless we're assessing every single combination and permutation, which would take us forever, we can't directly observe the competence being applied in every possible scenario. So we look for capability or evidence that the individual can change their competence and adapt their baseline competence to the different contexts. Another motivator for us at RMIT, as I mentioned in my intro, is that we we're redesigning our curriculum across the entire School of Health and Biomedical Sciences to introduce a common first-year block. So both Paul and I have students doing the same core subjects in professional practice, Indigenous diversity and determinants of health, and anatomy and physiology 1 and 2. But for us, the curriculum architecture essentially saw us consolidate our 3 different divisions of practice, so 3 different subjects for the 3 different divisions, into one single subject across both semester 1 and semester 2. So it was further motivation for us to try and align our assessments. And this is where we started from. We had 3 different divisions looking at clinical competency capability assessment in 3 different ways. We had medical imaging using an electronic professional development journal which included 40 pages of different elements, Nuke Med 73 pages, and then us in RT, keeping it simple as I'm prone to doing, having quite a simple assessment outline, no professional development journal, more so looking at the doing side of things. And then of course we had differences across each of the 4 year levels of the program as well. So we had quite a lot of variation in the way that we were tackling clinical assessments. So we started by going back to basics. What are the objectives of clinical assessments? And we want to firstly make sure that we're validating the capabilities, which is the end point of graduates. But we also want to make sure that we're facilitating learning, have some method to differentiate performance and grade it academically, stimulate reflection, and also drive the types of behaviour that we want students to be demonstrating whilst on placement. So in the spirit of co-design, we actually collaborated with industry on this one and convened a clinical assessment working group. And that had representation from the 3 divisions of practice, but also from the professional body itself as well. We sought ethics approval so that we can publish this in due course. And the first question we asked was, is it actually possible? Is the dream too big? Am I blue skying too much? And we landed on the fact that actually, no, it is possible. We spent the first 3 workshops comparing our ideas, understanding our interpretation of the capabilities, and actually realized that we are all on the same page, quite literally, with the way we're understanding these capabilities. And once we ascertained that, yes, it's possible, we set about trying to articulate it into clear dot points. And so we spent quite a few workshops unpacking what professionalism, what communication, what that looks like to each of us, and how that would scaffold across 4 years of clinical development. And once we had articulated the progression and the interpretation of the different capabilities, we set about putting this into a document that could be shared, which we then went on to share at our educators workshop in March 2024. Which we do every year. And this year we're actually doing it for the first time across the whole school. Paul is on the committee as well, helping us design it to be all health disciplines. So we're branching out of MedRad across the board. And at that meeting, the question became, this is great, it's fantastic, but how do we use it to fail a student? We need clear guidelines on what is and isn't a pass. And that sent us back to the drawing board a little bit, and we came up with some ideas of how we could do that. But one of the key drivers for us was digitizing the assessment. So moving away from paper-based assessments so that we can use digital platforms to highlight as soon as possible and as early as possible when a student is underperforming, which you don't get from paper-based forms because you're relying on the student to upload, or you're relying on the department to call you. So it was our opportunity to move into the digital platform as well. So in the first instance, we aligned our framework. We developed a very clear framework that's adapted across the 4 year levels and allows for the individual identities of the divisions to shine through. There's some activities that are hurdles that the students need to do before placement to demonstrate their readiness. There's the graded components, and then there's the hurdles that are completed by the clinical assessors or done in the clinical context during the placement period. And so then it became a question of, well, how do we digitize it? And that's where PebblePad came to the rescue. I'm not sure if I'm able to throw to Mark Derbyshire at the moment, but Mark is our incredible learning designer that was very patient in supporting us through the change process, shall we say. Essentially, we were not keen on PebblePad. I'm going to be very transparent about that. A lot of us in the discipline had used it previously, both on from the academic perspective, but also on the clinical floor. There was quite a lot of initial resistance. I was probably one of the most vocal of those resistors, but Mark very patiently and very kindly supported us through, showed us what it could do, developed some prototypes, and really talked us around to the point where, as you'll see in a moment, I am a full convert. So kudos needs to go to Mark for getting us across the line in that regard. But as you can see, a lot of hand-holding, I suppose, went in. We had initial demos, we had final agreement to proceed, we had a full day of training with Mark, we delivered some initial student training in the first week of semester, we had additional support sessions for diagnostic radiography and nuclear medicine in developing their own workbooks and activities, and we went fully live with the assessment strategy in August this year for clinical placement, and have also since adopted it for RT teaching and learning purposes as well. So this is what it looks like in terms of how it's been transitioned into PebblePad. The placement workbook includes the pre-placement checklist that they need to do before. We have technical competencies that are done on a division-specific level with a unified approach. They've got capability assessments, which we did have to host in Qualtrics, and I'll talk to why in a moment, and also a site induction and orientation checklist consistent with OH&S requirements at the end of week 1. We then also had 3 other worksheets. 2 of them were the same because the format was applicable across the divisions, and then the third one had an alignment but slight variation in flavour, which I'll demo in a second. So this is our workbook. It's a common workbook. It utilises, I'm trying to think of the word, whether it pulls in the pulls in the tagged assessments. I've forgotten the words, I apologise. But essentially it's the same workbook. It's got a placeholder for the competency assessment collection. Thank you, Mark. It's a collection functionality here so that the students just need to tag their competency with the word competency, and it will bring it in here, which allows us to use the same workbook for all students, but allows their individual competency relevant to their division of practice to come into the workbook, so it's still relevant for their division. And then the other components are all common across the workbook. So page 1 is a bit of an overview of due dates and what's required. That pre-placement checklist, are you ready? Have you done all the things? The site induction checklist in week 1, that gets sent off to the supervisors to sign off, and that uses the PebblePad interface as well. The capability assessments are done in Qualtrics and they get brought in as PDF assets. And then the competency assessments are done in PebblePad and tagged accordingly. The key thing, though, was the development of the learning support plans to address this issue of failure to fail, and also the query that the clinical sites had around how do we fail a student. So drawing on most clinicians' experience with maintaining progress notes for patients, we adapted a learning support plan, which is a template that only gets used by, a resource that only gets used by students that need it. They come in and they populate their areas of focus, and then we use the feedback component of PebblePad to maintain dates and times where progress is discussed with the student or updates are made, so that we've got real-time tracking and we can evidence that adequate supports and resources were put in place for students. We can tick off that they've achieved the required level of capability, or we can use it to really reinforce the fact that unfortunately, even with all those supports, they still didn't quite get to where they needed to, and so unfortunately we had to fail the student. In terms of their academic work, their case study was aligned, so it was the same template that was used, and we just copied it 3 times and tweaked the questions. But this was really fantastic in being able to reinforce that we're all working towards achieving particular outcomes for patients, even though we are doing that with perhaps different types of radiation or slightly different practices. It's all about understanding the patient, their background, the technical nature of the procedure, and what it is that you're able to achieve. So this was really a nice exercise for us in the discipline to align our own thinking. The capability reflection, again, because they are all working towards the same capabilities, they all need to reflect on the same capabilities, apart from their division-specific capabilities. And all we did there was, in the resource, have a placeholder that asked them to pick the one that was most relevant to their division, so we could use the same assessment template. And then the practical skills assessment. And this is a really fantastic feature for us. It's been really great working through this together. We've been able to use quite a few different elements of PebblePad for this one. So essentially the students will perform their a simulation of a clinical procedure on campus. We record that, and as academics assess it. We do use Qualtrics for that assessment, and again, I'll talk to that in a moment, but we get to watch them in real time. And then because we've recorded them, the students get to watch themselves back and complete a reflection based on their performance. And we've used one of the sort of off-the-shelf templates in either Driscoll, Gibbs or Kolb that we also have trained the students in how to use as a reflective instrument. And then they build their reflection assignment. So they put their reflection asset in here, they upload their video from Microsoft Teams that they've done, and they also upload the PDF of the assessment that they've been given. So it's a package of capability. And then depending on how this assessment goes, if we as academics identify an issue with their performance, it triggers the development of that learning support plan, which we then work with the student to build and share with the assessors before they go out on placement, so that they've got that bit of an insight. There were some questions around privacy, and we got around that by just initially letting the supervisors on placement know that there may be an issue asking them to perform their own initial assessment, and then once they have sort of come to their own conclusion, then the student would share the learning support plan with them, so that there's trying to mitigate the bias, I guess, in what the specific issue is. So the challenges for us in a lot of what we were trying to do is just the limitations, and we're hoping that as new versions of PebblePad are rolled out, these options are available. We had lovely feedback from the supervisors who want to see everything done in PebblePad, and we agree. We're just limited at the moment by some of the functions. So we wanted to use a single assessment tool that had branching options depending on whether it was the division of practice that was selected. So in the first instance, the branching functionality drove us to use Qualtrics. And also the team wanted to have the ability to enter feedback per line item in addition to the radio buttons to essentially justify the selection of either fully demonstrated, partially demonstrated, or not demonstrated, so that the students could see exactly why that score was given and what they needed to do to address it. So that layout was a key component. And then from the capability assessment, it really came down to automation or email triggering. The whole driver for us was that early intervention. And so having a tool that allowed us to tick a box that then pinged an email to the supervisor, to us as the academic, to say, supervisors completed the template and there's been an issue identified. That is something that we would really rely on to allow for the whole premise of early intervention to shine through. But we're hoping that that'll be resolved and we'll be able to move into PebblePad completely over the next little while. So in terms of rolling out, we did a lot of student education. I developed quite a few little resources, how-to guides, got a video. We did quite a few tutorials demonstrating the actual assessments before they went out on placement. We also used PebblePad early in the semester. We deployed a student orientation package where the students had embedded things like Padlets that you were just playing with, but also Mentees, where students could introduce themselves. We introduced ourselves as well as the academics, and also gave us an overview of why they wanted to study in the discipline, and then went into all the other resources, about their program, about the orientation programs that were available to them, and what the supports were that they could tap into throughout the university. And then at the end, a nice checklist that I could run a report on to check that who had engaged with the process and who was still not yet to log in, and allow me to kind of identify from the 250 first year students that I had in my mix, who did I need to reach out and actually make sure was okay and hadn't either decided to unenroll or was having trouble logging in. We also did a similar thing for our work integrated learning orientation. So we introduced work integrated learning and the expectation to complete a regional placement as well. We linked it back to the theory that they were studying around healthcare and why they needed to do a lot of preparations before entering the healthcare environment, what those preparations were in terms of police checks, vaccination schedules, etc., and how they needed to upload those into the system that we use, which is in place. And again, another checklist to make sure that they've done all the things that they needed to do. And again, something for me to monitor and report on as they were going through the process. We also used it for our lab inductions, predominantly in medical imaging and nuclear medicine, where they use live radioactive radiation on campus. Most of our stuff in radiation therapy is simulated, so we don't have the same regulation around radiation handling. So for the medical imaging students, they had to complete their induction checklist. And for the nuclear medicine students, they had quite an intensive induction, looking at also chemicals, radiation handling, and quite a few videos that they need to go through, and again, a checklist that they weren't able to progress into their workbook until they had actually, with the remainder of their workbook, until they had actually had this initial induction piece signed off. So that was a nice way to make sure that they were coming to you for advice because they really wanted the content if they hadn't done their induction. And obviously we were monitoring it with the reporting in the back end too. We also educated the academics. We built an assessor pack. Obviously, as the curriculum lead, I was the one closest to the development. Not everybody was familiar with PebblePad, so I developed a few little clicky demos for them. We did a couple of info sessions as well, just to make sure they were happy. But everybody was really happy with the handouts and were able to follow them quite easily on the day of the assessments. And we also, for our clinical partners, ran a series of webinars with demonstration of the platform. Mark kindly created a student account for me in the back end where I could act as a student, so I could interact with myself and showcase what the students were doing and what the assessors would see as a consequence of that. We also got a bit meta and hosted a how to use PebblePad guide in PebblePad, but also just showcased our profession. We have, a H5P little slideshow there about our long-standing history with medical radiation education at the university, and also a few other interactive H5P guides on how to use PebblePad and complete the assessments. But we're pretty happy with how it rolled out. Obviously, there's a lot more work to do. That we've only just deployed it for the first year of the program. We've got 3 more years to roll it out across. We're going to seek formal feedback from the clinical sites, but the anecdotal feedback is that they really liked the interface. They found it really clear and easy to use. They appreciated the rollout in terms of the implementation and the opportunity to see a demo and also do some self-directed learning on the website after the fact. We've learnt a lot about how students use PebblePad. And so we are looking at things like perhaps changing from an auto submit to a manual submit function, simply because that's how they are used to doing things in Canvas when they upload a written piece of work. So they want that satisfaction of submitting it to the portal. We might also, now that we've all got our own workbooks and an idea of how we're going to use PebblePad for teaching and learning, can we turn some of those teaching and learning activities into assessments and have the assessments being completed alongside it? On top of all of this, though, there's new MRPBA capabilities coming, which is going to throw a spanner in the works in terms of, hopefully they're not going to be too different to the current capabilities, but we'll have to do a new mapping exercise most likely. And then looking at how can we build it so that they can demonstrate a portfolio of capability across all 4 year levels of the program, so that they can demonstrate their evolving capability over time and their readiness to be registered as a practitioner at the end. That's pretty much it from me. I hope you've enjoyed it. And yeah, are there any questions?
Phenomenal, Julia. That was fantastic. Thank you for the presentation. And yeah, there's no questions in the chat other than just saying how amazing it is. So I loved the overview and the range of divisions there that you took us through at the start, and also those connections between theory and practice, and also being able to adapt those into the different contexts. I thought that the way that you stepped us through that was really fantastic. We also love that you were a convert to PebblePad, that you weren't convinced at the start as well. And I think that I have a question around that. So if you were someone at the beginning of their journey and going through a similar process with digitizing their assessments across multiple disciplines, what would be the first step that you would recommend that they take?
I think you need to be clear in what it is you're trying to assess. So I think, I kept saying to the team, this PebblePad is the platform, but what we're assessing is more important. It's just the platform is how we execute it. And so I think, why do you want to digitize, and have you actually got a solid assessment tool to begin with? And how is digitizing going to add value to that assessment framework? And for us, it was around that immediate feedback piece, but also data collection and being able to assess at a glance all 250 students by simply running a report. I think that was the key feature for us. And I have a long-term vision of being able to sort of build a dashboard that monitors student progress over time, and perhaps be able to plot
Beautiful.
evolution
Beautiful.
of capabilities over different placement blocks and that sort of thing. But that's down the track.
Well, thank you very much. That was fantastic. And we look forward to seeing how it develops even further over time. So thank you, Julia.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that.